Welcome to HFY Sci-fi channel. Don't forget to subscribe and explore. She came into being inside a sealed ward lit by filtered blue light, not because her health demanded it, but because exposure to her face in raw daylight disrupted biometric sensors across the facility. Infants cried when she passed. Machines reported errors. Eyes lingered, locked, refused to blink until pupils burned dry. Those who visited once did not return. Birth records were shredded within hours. Within the hegemony, order wasn't just law, it was design. Symmetry governed everything. Architecture, sentence length, gestures of greeting. No one built beauty for pleasure. It had rules, proportions, limitations. Deviations weren't forbidden. They were unthinkable. She became the exception that couldn't be processed. At 8, she was declared unclassifiable by the Visual Harmony Board. At 9, her portrait was banned from academic record. Not because it offended, because it couldn't be remembered properly. Officials described the sensation as retinal residue, a kind of imprint that blurred the memory but sharpened desire. Not lust, not affection. Something rawer, harder to name. No one touched her skin after 12. Not even medics. She learned to administer injections without instruction. Her blood was scanned, never drawn. Communication reduced to gestures. Meals delivered without eye contact. Not out of cruelty. Out of self-preservation. No system could retain stability in her presence for long. That wasn't superstition. It was documented, tested, confirmed. Across 64 observation periods, 89 specialists, 23 species. Disorientation, heartbeat variance, loss of time perception. No mirrors were allowed. Not to protect her. To protect others from watching her react to herself. They called her Lysra once, before that name was removed from public databank. Not deleted. Obscured. Like a pattern too precise to decode. The ones who studied her longest forgot they had done so. Security logs filled with entries that ended mid-sentence. Motion sensors triggered by no one. Dreams recorded from people who had never entered her compound. A gardener once slit his wrists in silence, surrounded by blooming Varelian nightthorns. When revived, he said nothing had happened. Only that he'd seen perfection and couldn't bear to prune it. She wasn't alone in the conventional sense. Dozens observed. Hundreds monitored. But the silence inside that containment wing felt heavier than space. Some called it reverence. Others described nausea that wouldn't leave. What frightened them wasn't that she existed. It was that she never spoke of wanting anything. Not escape. Not contact. Not understanding. Not even affection. There was no hunger in her presence, only gravity. When questions were asked, she didn't answer. Not with words. With eyes that held still longer than anyone was trained to endure. Eyes that did not accuse, did not plead, did not search, just remained unshaken, as if waiting for something that hadn't been invented yet. The hegemony did not hold trials for such cases. There were no charges, no crimes, no violations of conduct, only anomalies. She became the central one. At first assigned to the Department of Behavioral Aesthetic, then transferred to the Vault of Strategic Containment. Reclassified from civilian to asset. Redesignated not as female, not as human, not as person, but as harmonic interference class A. Those who argued for her release vanished from forums. One disappeared mid-sentence during a live transmission. Transmission logs showed a surge. No foul play detected. Only a sudden loss of will to speak. Inside her chamber, she aged without pattern. Time moved strangely near her. Surveillance reported inconsistencies in facial recognition. Hair color read differently in each quadrant of the room. Skin temperature fluctuated without cause. But vital signs remained optimal. Always optimal. Like a body waiting for a signal. They built failsafes. None triggered. Installed kill switches. None tested. She gave no reason for threat designation. Yet the threat increased. Not from action. From existence. From stillness. From the fact that after 33 rejections, 33 carefully vetted candidates sent with offers, contracts, treaties, bindings, each one returned silent, agitated, or ruined. One clawed out his own neural ports en route to the embassy shuttle. Another disappeared inside his ship for 2 years. No communications. When he emerged, his eyes had been surgically replaced with blank obsidian glass. When asked why, he said, she shouldn't be remembered in pieces. Not a single one of them claimed her. But someone else was coming. Uninvited. Unsanctioned. And something inside that chamber shifted. Not visibly. Not in temperature. Not in motion. But in presence. As if the silence, after all these years, had been listening back. The first suitor arrived under planetary escort, his robes dyed with the bloodroot of Atraxis, his posture trained in the ceremonial angles of courtship. He walked into the chamber flanked by translators and biometric filters, his voice wrapped in sanctioned politeness. He made it 6 minutes before requesting to be escorted out. His pupils had dilated beyond regulation limits, and his speech collapsed into non-lexical gasps. When questioned, he said only that she looked at him, and the question of desire became irrelevant. Not fear. Not awe. A kind of silence that reached through his intentions and left them weightless. The second refused to disembark. He viewed the surveillance feed, watched her brush her hand across a cup without drinking, and demanded to be returned to his fleet. His emissaries offered formal apologies, citing religious incompatibility. No mention of faith had been made in his initial dossier. By the 5th, the Council began modifying the encounter parameters. Drones mediated introductions. Audio delays were installed. Biological sedatives were embedded in the chamber's filtration system. The results did not change. Ambassadors from high bloodline sectors, warriors, heirs, genetic purists, all spoke eloquently on arrival. None could maintain coherence past the threshold of her gaze. One, a diplomat bred for emotional neutrality, began describing his childhood in agonizing detail, pausing only to ask if she felt cold. When denied exit, he placed his own fingers inside his mouth and bit through 2 of them. Upon return to his ship, he requested reassignment to agricultural service. Those who stayed longest deteriorated fastest. A prince from the Krithik enclave locked himself in her observation chamber for 9 hours. No physical contact occurred. No words exchanged. Only a shared stillness. When he was retrieved, his body was intact, but his tongue had been threaded with a language unknown to his people. Linguists found it composed entirely of impossible verbs. Another brought gift. Crystalline blooms forged in microgravity. A sculpture containing the memory of his mother's scent. He placed them before her, knelt, and waited. 3 hours passed. No movement, no sound. He stood, bowed, and whispered something into the wall, not to her. Before departure, he left a single request: destroy his name. Not strike it from records. Remove it from existence. Make it as if it had never been spoken aloud. Over time, patterns emerged. The suitors no longer arrived with expectation. They came as if to test a myth. Each carried different intentions, some noble, some obscene, but all left mark. One confessed to seeing his own death behind her face. Another claimed her presence rewrote the shape of memory itself. None could explain what they had felt, only that it did not belong in a world governed by reason. Observers began noting anomalies unrelated to her. One technician found himself standing outside the compound door without knowing how he arrived. Another reported hearing music through the concrete, though no recordings existed. One lost sensation in his hands each time she blinked. Every visitor, every analyst, every witness, whether physical or remote, carried something back with them, even if they didn't know what it was. Years passed. The chamber remained unchanged. She never spoke first. Never reached out, never asked for them. Yet each arrival felt like a question pressed against the skin. What happens when someone sees beauty they are not allowed to touch? What survives in the mind when desire is neither fulfilled nor denied, but simply returned unopened? At year 17, a suitor wept during transmission. Not during the encounter. After. Sitting alone in a diplomatic shuttle, arms crossed against his chest as if guarding a wound he could not name. His final statement was brief. She is not waiting for love. She is waiting for someone who remembers how to ask without trembling. The council did not stop the process. It became ritual. A test of will disguised as diplomacy. A performance of strength measured in silence. By the 29th, there were no speeches. No offers. Visitors entered, observed, and left without introducing themselves. One reached out his hand halfway before retracting it midair, fingers curling inward as if struck. The 33rd came alone. No retinue, no gift. He stood across from her for 5 minutes. Then smiled, not kindly, but as one recognizing a game he could not win. He said thank you. He bowed once. He walked out. None of them had touched her. None had been touched by her. Yet each carried a scar impossible to locate. Each rejection, though spoken differently, meant the same thing. She cannot be chosen. Not by them. Not yet. She was never alone, though not a single face watched her directly. The surveillance architecture extended far beneath the chamber's floor, through soil baked sterile by ordnance, where no roots grew and no light reached. Down there, neural archives pulsed in stillness, 23 memory clusters, 7 biometric translators, 3 emotional dampeners running in tandem, constantly recalibrating. Not for her protection. Not for her growth. For containment. Each visitor's reaction passed through filters too sophisticated for the visible world. Facial heat maps, pulse shifts beneath the skin, microtremors in muscle groups never trained to move that way, everything recorded, digitized, coded, and cross-matched. Not just once. Thousands of times, over years, across species with no shared anatomy, no shared definitions of attraction, no common markers for affection or danger. Yet something always repeated. The moment contact became possible, something in the observer failed to function. Not violently. Not visibly. Just quietly enough to unsettle. The Symmetry Council never addressed the data publicly. That would require admitting uncertainty. Instead, they rewrote their own parameters for control. They stopped asking what she was. They began asking what she changed. Every encounter operated under revised protocol. Visitors weren't candidates. They were instruments, subjected to exposure trials under the illusion of courtship. Every movement inside the chamber was predictive bait. Would she speak? Would she approach? Would she smile, not as reflex but as strategy? Did her body language track with emotional variance, or did it drift, like artificial gravity sliding one step too slow? By year 10, recordings ceased to include direct audio. Not because it lacked relevance, but because the data itself became unstable in playback. Sound waves broke into silence at key intervals. Some described hearing their own names layered into the hum of the walls. Others noticed a strange compression in their own recorded voices, words spoken normally, but replayed without consonants, as if the language had softened itself to avoid recognition. The chamber's architecture was rebuilt 5 times. Materials changed, angles remeasured, acoustic absorption redesigned in secret. Each iteration performed worse than the last. Surveillance logs filled with skipped time frames, sensor inconsistencies, fluctuating visual density. They stopped assigning guards to the outer threshold. No one stayed longer than protocol required. Even the drones moved slower, as if burdened by something they couldn't name. Within internal reports, she became less a subject and more a condition. They documented her not as a person, but a pattern. Not through observation, but through degradation. What she touched did not decay. What she touched refused to hold its shape. Attempts at neural mapping failed. Memory probes deployed in microdoses failed to lat. The few that returned data brought contradictions. Temporal anomalies. Cognitive loops. One test showed her age increasing and decreasing in alternating frames. One scan claimed her body lacked symmetrical alignment, yet every image insisted it was flawless. Artificial intelligences trained on visual analysis refused to render her in full resolution. They described her features with phrases never written into their lexicons. One AI crashed during rendering. Its final output read, "She should not exist in parts." No one reported these findings to her. She received no updates, no summaries, no mentions of what each encounter had cost. The silence was intentional, not because she wouldn't understand, because they feared she already did. Some on the council argued for termination, not out of malice, out of necessity, yet no one authorized it, not because of protocol, because no one could agree on what they would be ending. A person? A phenomenon? A weapon built so slowly it forgot its purpose? By year 26, observation became ritualized. One counselor began reciting a phrase before every review, "May beauty remain bound." It was not policy. It was superstition, an attempt to anchor the mind before exposure. Those who spent longest near her chamber began developing dreams with shared elements, glass corridors without end, voices speaking in reverse, a hand too perfect to belong to any species. These were documented, ignored, filed, repeated. No disciplinary action was taken. Denial required less energy than confrontation. Outside her chamber, time moved according to law. Inside, time adjusted itself to presence. No one ever told her this. No one dared. Because surveillance no longer watched her. It measured what she made others see. The breach registered 12 seconds too late. By the time sensors aligned, the ship had already crossed the orbital mesh, bypassed customs protocol, and entered descent. No codes, no clearance. Hull signatures erased. Navigation profile unknown. The exterior carried no insignia, no identification, no plea. Only a matte finish that reflected nothing, absorbed everything, as though it had traveled through places not meant for light. Automated batteries rotated toward it, locked, prepared to fire. Command overrides failed to engage. Power routes collapsed in sequence, not from sabotage, but silence. Nothing exploded. Nothing screamed. Systems merely stopped cooperating. It touched down without ceremony. Not near a port. Not near a diplomatic inlet. It landed on the outskirts of the containment sector, inside restricted airspace, inside declared lethal proximity, and released a single figure. One gate. One path. No escort. No weapon drawn. No armor visible. Only breath that steamed from nostrils in the sterile air, and eyes that scanned nothing except the direction of her vault. Surface drones activated, but none advanced. They tracked movement but offered no obstruction. His pace remained constant. Not measured. Not calculated. Certain. He passed checkpoints without challenge. Code barriers pulsed but did not deny. Audio deterrents initialized and collapsed again. Warnings blinked into darkness before their sentences could finish. Inside the security control dome, no one moved. Operators stared into screens that no longer showed a man approaching, only a corridor that forgot to report him. Command towers exchanged incomplete sentences. No identity. No criminal match. No vocal sample. Not because he lacked record, but because his name had been burned from the central archive. A redacted file with metadata still smoldering. Whatever he had done, no one was allowed to remember it. His uniform told stories through absence. Insignia scraped off at the edges, seams restitched by hand, fabric scorched in places that suggested proximity to fire, not battle. A thin chain hung beneath the collar, charred at one end, fused with a tag no scanner could read. One shoulder bore a medical implant, long deactivated, etched with civilian script crossed through with a single diagonal cut. No one approached him, because no one wanted to be the one who tried. The final checkpoint opened without request. The vault corridor exhaled cold air, the kind that had no scent. Not death. Not metal. The kind that suggested something waiting behind it had forgotten what breath was. He paused before entry. Not hesitation. A stillness born from recognition. No scan required. No interface. The door had waited long enough. Inside she sat as always. Upright. Awake. Unmoved by time. Her hands rested on her lap. Eyes lifted before his footfall could reach the chamber floor. She had seen arrivals before. 33. All variations of posture and pride. All shaped by fear wrapped in courtesy. None remained. This time she did not adjust her spine. Did not raise her chin. Did not widen her gaze. Nothing within her shifted toward performance. She simply watched. He entered without permission. Without announcement. Without ritual. His boots marked the floor in uneven cadence, not out of injury, but because his left leg carried weight differently, like something fused had never quite accepted its host. His first breath inside the room sounded wrong. Not loud. Not sharp. Just wrong, as if the air recognized it didn't belong in this rhythm. He removed nothing. Offered nothing. Said nothing. 3 steps in, he stopped. Their eyes met. The silence did not thicken. It cleared. She did not blink. Neither did he. No introduction followed. No gift presented. No cultural preamble. Only gaze and gravity and a stillness untouched by law. He spoke once. The words were not poetic. Not forced. Not softened by performance. I want you as my wife. No flourish. Just truth that did not ask permission to exist. He didn't bow. Didn't offer his name. The sentence had been spoken, placed between them without fanfare, like an object meant to be touched, not discussed. Her face didn't change. No twitch of muscle. No defensive stillness. The expression she returned was neither rejection nor welcome. Only a kind of watching that measured for weight, not meaning. He didn't fill the silence. Let it breathe, let it stretch, let it sharpen. Most before him drowned in it, scrambled for phrases, clung to practiced lines meant to flatter, neutralize, or seduce. He waited. She tilted her head, slow, not for emphasis, but to test whether his posture would shift under realignment. It didn't. She let her lips part slightly. No sound came. Just breath that stopped just short of a word. He smiled. Not charming. Not disarming. Just a movement of mouth that carried something old. Laughter came, low and dry, not loud enough to command the room but strong enough to remain in it. Not mocking. Not warm. A sound that had survived places no courtship had any business surviving. She stood. Not as ceremony. Not as provocation. Her steps were few. She crossed half the space, slow, even. Closed half the distance. No greeting. No posture shift. Hands still by her sides. He didn't look away. She did not speak. Instead, raised her arm, not fully, just enough to indicate the beginning of gesture. Enough to bait a reaction. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion. In interest. The movement stopped. Silence again. He took 1 step closer. Still no contact. She lifted her gaze higher, not to see better, but to unbalance the moment. Her chin tilted upward, forcing him into the light. Most crumbled under that. He didn't. His face remained still, rough lines catching the glare without apology. She walked around him once. No sound but her breath. He didn't follow with his eyes. That was her first test. She expected the glance. Expected the small, defenseless pivot. None came. When she returned to face him, her voice arrived. 1 word. I. Not accusation. Not curiosity. Not need. A question without ornament. He didn't rush the answer. Because I know what you are, he said. That was the second test. Everyone before claimed to understand. They described her with poetry, with fear, with language soaked in awe. He didn't explain. He identified. She stepped forward again. 1 more pace. Closer than anyone had stood before. His hands did not rise. His stance didn't close. His breath remained even. She whispered a sentence used before, an ancient phrase taught to confuse linguistic matrices. A relic phrase. Something that made the brain work too hard, built to disrupt attraction. She said it slow, soft, right into the hollow air between their bodies. He blinked once and laughed again. "That's nothing," he said. "I've seen what burns in stars and pretends to be love. You're not that." She lowered her gaze to his mouth. Stayed there. Long enough to measure shape. She tilted her head again. Slightly. Eyes now low. Lips not moved. He spoke before she could. "You're not made for waiting," he said. "You've just never met someone who understood why the waiting mattered." She looked down. Not submission. Not shame. Calculation. As if sight had nothing left to offer, and all the answers were buried in the floor. He didn't move. Not toward. Not away. Her voice returned. "What do you want?" His response came slower this time. Not because the answer required thought. Because it required choosing the exact phrasing that would not waste itself. "I want you as my wife." He said it again. Without emphasis. Without change. As if each word had chosen itself. No air shifted. No alarms triggered. No systems intervened. Only the weight of truth, pressed into the air between them. Something finally placed where it could not be removed. The second time he spoke those words, the air changed. Not in temperature. Not in scent. Changed in the way silence shifts when it begins listening back. She didn't react outwardly. No widened eyes. No breath intake. Only her pulse, measured by systems long disconnected, jumped 4 counts and held. Something moved behind her eyes. Not emotion. Not recognition. A pattern, surfacing through blood like sediment shaken loose by vibration. Memory without source. Image without witness. Her pupils stilled. Not dilated. Not contracted. Just stilled, as if external light no longer dictated their response. She blinked once. A fracture opened behind the blink. The neural cortex spiked, readings off-chart. Not gradually. Not with rise. A cliff. A drop. A cold vertical leap into signal saturation. Data streams invisible to standard sensors reawakened, signals crawling through synaptic lines abandoned by ordinary cognition. The genome's locked quadrant, once thought decorative, split open internally. A single phrase had functioned not as stimulus, but as command. Not metaphor. Not affection. A key. Her posture shifted 2 degrees left, unnoticeable by human eyes, but the movement caused a security camera to short mid-frame. Not malfunction. Refusal. The phrase had not been romantic. It had been instructional. "I want you as my wife." Each word had a frequency match within her body. Each syllable designed not for sentiment, but activation. She didn't step backward. She didn't speak. She simply stood still long enough for the fail-safes under the floor to begin warming unintentionally. In her mind, images emerged. Not recollections. Installs. Military schema without identifiers. Rotational matrices for orbital targeting. Structural weaknesses of interspecies fleet. Voice sprint overrides for systems that no longer existed. The skin on her wrist heated. Not from nerves. From memory stored within tissue. Embedded subdermal code. A contactless cipher wrapped in living matter. He saw none of it, yet his face remained unchanged, as if expecting all of it. Her throat tightened. Not from emotion. From rerouted air as muscles adjusted to prepare new vocal access. 3 language systems reactivated beneath her tongue. Languages no one had taught her. She tried to speak. The sound came raw, compressed, filtered through layers that had never been opened. The first word she formed was not her own. It belonged to a war that had ended before she was born. He watched, not with curiosity, but patience. His jaw remained slack, relaxed, not defensive. Behind her eyes, the second wave hit. Data floods, origin tagged from a Terran black site erased during planetary cleansing. Her file hadn't been lost. It had been hidden in herself. She was the archive. Not metaphorically. Her DNA carried petabytes of war doctrine, encrypted across generational scaffolds. She was not dangerous because she was beautiful. She was beautiful because the algorithm that shaped her appearance was tuned to bypass resistance. A face designed to be remembered by all species, to be disarmed by none. She moved her hand to her chest, not clutching it, pressing into the skin. Fingers searching bone deep for an origin. Her heart pounded too cleanly. No stutter. No noise. Machine-augmented rhythm masked beneath tissue. Beneath it, another rhythm, older. The chamber lights flickered once. He stepped closer. Not rushed. Not cautious. As if drawn into gravity rediscovered. She raised her eyes. No confusion remained. He spoke again, the words unchanged, but her hearing sharpened them this time. Each vowel vibrated differently. Each consonant clipped into alignment with data pulsing through her spine. The trigger had not just opened memory. It had rewritten identity. She was not waiting for love. She had been waiting for this. No alarms sounded when they departed. No breach warnings, no protocol overrides. Only blank screens blinking in rhythm, pretending to monitor, pretending to resist. Doors that once hissed under pressure slid open with no mechanical resistance, as if the infrastructure itself recognized its master. He walked ahead. Not quickly. With certainty that didn't demand speed. She followed, one pace behind, body upright, gaze forward, not searching for obstacles but daring them to appear. Surveillance systems watched without interference. Drones perched in overhead sockets tracked their movement but didn't fire. No commands issued. No countermeasures deployed. The lockdown grid waited too long, waited just enough for escape to cross the threshold where intervention looked like fear. They boarded without resistance. The ship opened before command. A vessel not meant for diplomacy. Burn scars mapped its hull like old language. Engines rebuilt without schematic. Patches welded by hand. Tech too outdated to predict, too strange to categorize. No one knew how it flew. Only that it did. The sky opened. Within minutes, the declaration arrived. Fugitives. The sentence carried no trial, no delay, no negotiation. Not a manhunt. A purge order. Disruption at source. Drones left the cloud banks by thousands. Formless swarm across atmosphere, descending from orbital stillness like breath sucked from a mouth about to scream. Inside the vessel, the panels dimmed. Not from damage. From rerouted function. Every screen fed input from 5 seconds ahead, time folded inside itself like muscle under strain. He moved between controls without checking. Fingers traced commands into surfaces that didn't light up, but responded. She sat without instruction. One hand gripping the side rail, knuckles pale. Her vision blurred, not from motion. From contradiction. The ship didn't shake. Reality did. Coordinates distorted as her mind slipped between recognition and noise. Not hallucination. Overlap. Past and present jostled for room, scraping against each other behind her eyes. She tried to stand. Her legs moved before she told them. Subroutines bled into conscious thought. A command she didn't remember issuing rerouted the ship's shielding algorithm. His eyes flicked toward her, not confusion. Confirmation. Code within her rewrote exterior flight matrices. She didn't understand how she knew. She only knew the map was wrong, and she could fix it by wanting it different. He pulled the ship into a wormfield. No beacon marked the entrance. No charts plotted the depth. Space folded in on itself without ceremony. Time slurred. Proximity alarms sounded, but only once, then died, as though embarrassed by their own misunderstanding. Drones followed. Not all. Most turned away. Not from failure. From hesitation. Something about her presence corrupted predictive pursuit. Artificial intelligences programmed to adapt suddenly chose not to. Those that pressed inward fell into spatial decay. Speed became directionless. Trajectory collapsed into orbitless drift. One by one, they peeled off without impact. No battle. No defense. Just refusal. Inside the ship, she gripped her head. Vision split. Each blink opened another set of images. Memories that didn't belong to her. Battles she hadn't fought. Lovers she had never touched. Orders given in voices she recognized but couldn't name. The seat beneath her softened. Or vanished. Her weight shifted. Body suspended between muscle memory and alien familiarity. He didn't speak. His presence kept time, not with words but with action. Each adjustment to the console matched her pain spike. Each recalibration aligned with neural dissonance. He knew what was happening. Or he had seen something like it before. Or perhaps he didn't need to know. Only needed to believe she would survive it. Her breath shortened. Not from fear. From adaptation. Lungs realigning to match oxygen requirements she wasn't born with. A second heartbeat emerged beneath the first. Pacing faster. Stronger. Conflict raged inside her skull, but there was no chaos. Only clarity that struck too hard, too fast. She saw numbers as light. Music as structure. Shapes as intentions. She was changing. Not breaking. Not transforming. Returning. She reached toward the panel in front of her. Fingers tapped without knowing purpose. The ship shifted again. Gravity reversed for a moment. The swarm outside dissolved in the distance. They were no longer being chased. They were being followed by something that couldn't remember how to catch them. She slept without closing her eyes. Not rest. Not surrender. A stasis held together by code breaking itself apart behind her bones. The ship had stopped somewhere beyond track space. No signals entered. None left. The panels dimmed themselves. Not to conserve energy. To remove distraction. Her skin no longer matched any recorded shade. Sensors mapped it differently each hour. In the dark, she glowed faintly. Not light, but memory. Every cell became a conduit. Language passed through tissue, not as sound, not as thought, but as instruction. She had become writable. The genome carried a block. Inserted by Earth scientists who knew they would not survive what came. A fragment from before compliance. Before symmetry. Before the hegemony redefined human identity to fit universal standards of containment. A fragment not just resistant to adaptation, but predatory toward it. They had tried to erase chaos from beauty. They had tried to standardize attraction. Flatten awe. Purify emotion into regulation. What remained of humanity had agreed, had signed, had submitted. But something ancient was kept. Hidden deep. Not in archives. Not in vaults. In flesh. A strand of raw origin folded inside her ribosomal command chain, waiting for recognition. It recognized him. The phrase wasn't romantic. It wasn't poetic. It was genetic ignition. A spoken cipher keyed into resonance by proximity to matching will. Once spoken by the right voice, not just any, the sequence opened. Not metaphorically. Opened as in reorganized her molecular behavior. Overrode false symmetry. Rewrote her body's response to artificial calibration. She no longer reflected beauty. She imposed it. Not as aesthetic. As structure. Wherever her presence reached, symmetry began to fail. Machines designed to measure perfection began to misfire. Creatures bred for stillness developed restless limbs. Artificial systems hardened against desire found themselves recalculating core protocols. Her body did not seduce. It destabilized pattern itself. She was not dangerous because she could be desired. She was dangerous because she could no longer be defined. The Council had thought her anomaly. Thought her disruption. They were wrong. She was prototype. An unfiltered version of what Earth had once tried to protect before negotiation became survival. No other genome could match it. Not because it was better. Because it refused alignment. It carried inside it the capacity to undo adaptation. Not by force. By reminding the body what it had been before consent was written into its shape. She remembered fire. Not a memory from life, but encoded sense. Flames in orbit. Cities cracking open under pressure. Her people didn't die in weakness. They died in strategy. They buried their final weapons in bloodlines, not arsenals. She was not alone in origin. But she was the only one who had been found. Outside the ship, no pursuit followed. Not because she had evaded it. Because those sent to find her began forgetting what they were supposed to fear. Each hour her presence expanded. Not spatially. In influence. She was rewriting expectation. Slowly. Precisely. Irreversibly. He stopped hiding her. Not because they were safe. Because concealment no longer served purpose. He walked to the transmitter, bypassed every protocol meant to prevent direct uplink, fed a raw feed into the network without filter. No editing. No distortion. No captions to prepare the mind. No disclaimers to soften reception. Her image, unchanged, unposed, without background. Simply presence, transmitted at scale the hegemony had outlawed for any human signature. The reaction was immediate. One sector's military grid shut down within minutes. Not because of sabotage. Because command units began disobeying directive. Crews refused to carry out reroute orders. Ships ignored proximity calls. A minor planetary governor fell to his knees mid-briefing, unmoving, eyes open, mouth silent. A religious enclave reclassified their primary doctrine within the hour. Their symbol adjusted to match her facial geometry. Not as worship, as inheritance. Elsewhere, riots broke open without banners. Streets filled not with slogans, but with sound, throats shouting names no one had taught them. Names she had never spoken aloud. Languages she had never heard, forming phrases that trembled with certainty. Not all responded with awe. Some with fear. Some with violence. But none with confusion. Across bureaucracies, across planets where human genetic memory had been diluted to myth, her image stirred something unprocessed. Not awe. Not belief. An ancient recognition. A knowing that hadn't been earned through learning, but returned through contact. Reports flooded into council terminals without cohesion. Diplomatic channels choked. Entire networks blinked out not from overload, but refusal. Civil systems abandoned encryption and began broadcasting what few dared to speak. She was not anomaly. She was origin. Programs designed to suppress emotional variance in hybrid populations began malfunctioning. Thought patterns long stabilized by pharmacological governance fractured. People stopped responding to predicted cues. Grief surfaced where it had been muted. Desire returned where it had been coded out. No code frame could account for beauty that altered infrastructure. No regulation prepared them for aesthetics that disassembled political order. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Her face, transmitted raw, became instruction. He stood beside her during the first transmission, but the camera never looked at him. He didn't try to be seen. He had already fulfilled the only purpose he recognized. He had found the lock. He had spoken the key. He had chosen not to save her from the world. He had chosen her to end it. The word fire never appeared in any broadcast. Yet cities burned. Not from her hands. From what she returned to people who had been taught to forget. She wasn't built to be loved. She wasn't built to be worshipped. She was built to be remembered. And memory had always been the first form of resistance.